to change what I believe. In other words, help me to forgive it.
Don't make it what?
Help me to forgive
Forgive.
myself for allowing this to be exactly as it's always been. Can you be okay with that? Can any of us be okay with that? Or does that seem to negate the reason that we're studying this course? And when we ask from that ego perspective, it's within that context that we seem to receive. And therein lies the issue. That's why changing our mind seems to be so difficult. Because we're trying to change our mind from within the awareness of the ego mind. And it's not going to happen. It's not there. So what is the answer? Now keep in mind, the other part, the other element that's so crucial in this is understanding that God's will for us is perfect happiness.
Yeah.
And I happen to believe that whether or not I'm happy with my ego or whether I'm happy with my spirit, God's will for me is perfect happiness. So, how do I introduce that element into my awareness, into my choosing awareness, and allow it to work for me? Okay, in the most simple way possible, take a look at our political situation that's happening right now. Look at the contentious atmosphere that exists within this, whether it's the refugee situation or the Supreme Court nominee, whatever it is, what would it take for you to be perfectly comfortable in allowing someone else's choice and perception to be perfectly okay?
Trust. Knowing it isn't real.
There you go.
Entirely that. How could you not, or how could you, if you didn't first believe that it wasn't real? Otherwise, you're going to come up with a sacrifice. So, how many of us are at a place where we can step back and say, the world that I see is not real, and I'm okay with that? We always get caught when we focus on the what instead of the why. It's not in the holy relationship. What is the holy relationship, incidentally? What would the holy relationship be?
A verification of the reality that we've already felt inside, that each has already felt inside.
It's the assumption of the oneness. That is the holy relationship, which sounds like an oxymoron, and it is. Because the one is equal to the every, the whole, the all. Getting the perception out of the way to allow that to stand clear in our mind. Now, a lot of this becomes very hypothetical when we start to get into what we're talking about now. And it doesn't really help us a whole lot. What does help us is to try on every occasion that we have an opportunity, is to try to allow our sense of acceptance of our oneness to become a reality. And it's that we always ask the God Self how to find, how to see. Our granddaughter was just here visiting, and she's only 14, but she's decided that she wants to go into politics. And I said, with all of the contentiousness and everything that's going on in our world today, why would you want that? She said, well, that's the quickest way I can think of to make a change. I said, well, while you're trying to think about changing somebody's perception in the world, think about this. Will you do that more effectively by becoming one with them or trying to convince them of your point of view? In other words, separating from them. And she got it. That's where we have to start with what we want. We have to be able to step back and say, I don't know what would make me happy, but I do know that I really, really want to be loving. I really want to be peaceful. These things I want. So Now, I can say to the God self, show me how to do it. You see, we're just flipping it. Instead of allowing the ego to set the parameters, we're saying, this is, as Tom was saying, seeing the actor behind the character and knowing that the actor wants to be loving, wants to be peaceful, wants to be happy, just doesn't know how to be, has gotten all of these other things in the way. So we've got something purposeful that we can ask for. We can say, we can have our God conversations. Say, show me how to do this. I think it bears a great deal of importance to remember, or to be aware, let's say, that the entire purpose for trying to heal this idea of separation is the belief, the singular belief, that you are separate. We're not trying to heal the belief of separation. We're trying to heal the belief. We're not trying to heal separation. We're trying to heal the belief in separation. Because the only place it exists, the only place separation exists is in our belief. Otherwise it doesn't exist. That's why he says that this is so principal to our so-called salvation. I think it bears a great deal of importance to remember, or to be aware, let's say, that the entire purpose for trying to heal this idea of separation is the belief, the singular belief, that you are separate. We're not trying to heal the belief of separation. We're trying to heal the belief. We're not trying to heal separation. We're trying to heal the belief in separation. Because the only place it exists, the only place separation exists is in our belief. Otherwise it doesn't exist. That's why he says that this is so principal to our so-called salvation. Recognize that the thing that you're wishing for, you don't have a choice about. Let that idea go, and the rest will go with it. So we have to change the purpose that we've given the world. It can no longer be to show us demonstrate death. It won't be. And that's what he's calling on us, to see. The only reason for death, in truth, is to obscure the presence of love. That's the only reason for the idea of death. Because death is a representation of guilt and sin and all of that crap. But none of that exists. No. What exists? Begin with that. If you're ever wondering how to arrive at the truth, just begin with the truth. And you always begin with the presence of love. Because that is the one truth that we have to recognize, to fall back on every occasion. It's simply that. I am the presence of love. Now everything that comes to you through the awareness of loving. And that's all there is. That changes everything. The phrase in the Course, I am not a body, I am free. We have a tendency to dwell upon the I am not a body part, and not upon what it means to be free. And what it means to be free, as I mentioned to you a few moments ago, is not to be afraid of life. And life and love are the same. Life can't be experienced other than through the experience of love. And so what it means to find that part of you that cannot die, to me, is symbolic of my willingness to trust that there is no real part of me that is afraid of losing love. Spirit conforms itself to the experience of loving. I told John this morning my experience of going through the hospital first and then to the rehab center and so forth. It's been very strange because there was a part of me that was going through the experience and another part of me that was just kind of feeling the strangeness that there was this experience that I was going through. And I would see the people, I had extraordinary contact with so many living people, just amazing. But watching each of these people, or seeing them performing their tasks and doing what they do through the experience, through their interpretation of the experience of loving, was just amazing. And hopefully if I tell you about it, you won't feel the need to do it yourself. I wonder how it is that we finally come to accept the miracles, so-called, in place of our perception. What do you suppose it is that shifts, that allows us to have that experience?
The absence of resistance.
That'd be one way of describing it.
I've gotten to believe that when I truly want it, I'll have it. I'll see it.
There's a difference between wanting it and accepting it. Do you
I mean-
have the feeling that you really wanted something, but you just weren't quite sure why you didn't have it? Many of us believe that we already have everything.
Sometimes I believe it, not all the time.
Let's not get ourselves in a mode where we think there is some value to pain and suffering. This is a big thing for the ego. And it's always the ego's real trial of your devotion to it is to ensure you that once you accept being totally happy, it's going to find something that I guarantee you will not be happy with. Because we always want to come back to that belief that out of pain and suffering comes some kind of good. And believe me, there is no good that comes from pain and suffering. None. It's the good that comes from recognizing that pain and suffering is a false hope, not the pain and suffering itself. It is from our recognition that there is no value in the pain and suffering.
Would there not
That-
possibly be
that-
a value in pain and suffering in so much as it might stimulate the thought there must be a better way?
There is, Roger. There's no denying that there is. But that is a real ego ploy. I'm not saying don't use it, but please do recognize it for what it is. Because even the thought that there must be a better way would never have to arise if we didn't believe that there was something already wrong. So it's the question of what does come first, the chicken or the egg. Does the suffering come first, and then we find a way to relieve ourselves from the suffering? That's the ego way. The truth is that when you read something about it's impossible for you not to have the peace and happiness of God, it's only because that is the natural state, and when we are in that state, there is no sense of anything being wrong to raise or bring back or reflect and experience that something could be wrong. So always remind yourself that what we are trying to remember is the perfect peace of God from which, to which, there is no opposite. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Robert?
I'm working with a group at the moment. I'm working with a group of doctors, psychologists and counsellors. It's a 6-month program, and it's called Love-Centered Coaching. And we're working for 6 months together, mostly online. We do a class, a 2-hour class every 2 or 3 weeks. But it's called Love-Centered Coaching because in psychology and psychotherapy and counselling, really love is a taboo word. You're not really allowed to mention it. I mean, as much as anything, quite honestly, for insurance purposes. There's a big fear around using the word love in the medical profession and in the psychology profession. And
what do you suppose that is?
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to it. And partly, I would say, what we're doing with love-centered coaching is what I basically first came across in Tom and Linda. Tom and Linda and I, and a group of us actually in Kauai, we had a number of conversations exploring spiritual counselling. The idea that the ego can't heal itself. You know, psychology can't heal psychology. And psychology can only really be healed by love. And it's very moving that I'm doing that program now, because it's really a conversation I started with Tom and Linda. Really, we started that nearly 20 years ago, I think.
Oh, probably more.
Yeah, 20 years in this lifetime, in the other lifetimes, you know. But
What did he tell us this morning in that regard about using love as a psychotherapy? You wrote it down.
There was a lot.
I asked you to write it down.
Well, we talked. I don't think I did write it down actually. We wrote something else down, Tom, for your book.
Yeah.
But we were focusing on the idea that it's only through loving that we will come to know that we are loved. It felt, as ever, they are very beautiful words, but I think as ever, Tom was, I feel like you were in the vibration of love when you said it. So somehow it wasn't just the words, it was the fact that Tom, I think you are love when you speak about love. And you know, when you do that, it's just like game over. You know, you just go, like nothing left to say. It's all there, only by loving, when you know that you are loved. It was very beautiful. But that's sort of how those were the conversations. You've never articulated it to me like that before, but in a way that's been the conversation this whole time.
We started a group of everyone who attended was a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
Each one of them was dedicated to centering their practice around the principles of love instead of the principles of psychotherapy. So it was, my goodness, we must have, I don't remember exactly when it started, but we must have continued it for several years. Yes, whatever the subject is enhanced by that, by coming from.
There's been, one of my big sort of meditations over the years has been on happiness. And so I wrote a book called Happiness Now. And then another one called Be Happy, which was based on an 8-week happiness program that I created on the National Health Service in England. And then I turned my attention to success and had a really good look at success. So I wrote a book called Authentic Success. And then I wrote a book called Lovability, knowing how to love and be loved, which was lovability. I'm hoping I'll have got it in there. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah.
So, is there kind of a door to happiness, something like that, or?
How do you mean, like?
A book that Robert's written called...
Maybe that's it.
The door to happiness.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
I think there's that expression that
Yeah.
it should be thought of in that sense.
What do you consider the door to happiness, just real quickly?
Well, I mean, it took a little while for me to work this out, but I think it's that the soul is already happy. I think that's it. Really. The soul is already happy.
The soul, I see.
Yeah, like the soul is already happy, but the ego is so busy searching for happiness that it hasn't stopped to see that the soul is already happy. So
we put barriers to happiness?
I don't think it's that. I think, it's, like how it says in the course, I think this extraordinary line right in the introduction to the course where and I think it's such an important point, which I'm sure you guys will have looked at. It says that this course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. And for me, what's so significant about that is it doesn't say at removing the blocks to love. It says about removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. So nothing can block love. And I think in the same way, nothing can block joy. Joy is a quality of the soul. It's like a quality of the divine.
Yeah.
So we can be temporarily unaware of it in the dream, but I think it's like the soul is already happy. And for me that was the biggest thing, because I was always I was engaged in the pursuit of happiness. You know, I thought the pursuit of happiness meant that you eventually found happiness. But what I learned along the way is that if you pursue happiness, you've placed happiness outside of you, and until you bring it home, you'll never get there. So in a way, the pursuit of happiness is the biggest cause of unhappiness. So because we've put it outside of us. But if we know that our true nature, our soul is already happy, then I think we can do something with that. And so with the Happiness Project, I always said the goal of the Happiness Project is to help people stop searching for happiness and to start following their joy. And I think there's a world of difference. If you're searching for happiness, you're searching for something outside of you. If you're following your joy, I believe you're listening to the voice for love, and you're living a guided life. So. Yeah, the search necessarily.
Really?
Yeah. And there is a big line or a statement in the Course where it says that the ego's edict is seek but do not find.
Yes.
Which is quite a curious one, isn't it? It's an interesting thing to me how so many of the things that I thought I'd wanted the most, when they've appeared, I've been terrified. Like whether that's love or happiness or success or abundance or anything, it's like this seeking seems to perpetuate a sense of self that self just is deeply compromised when love, happiness, abundance and good things come. It's almost like the ego can't really survive love.
What is there about a job that would make it unlikable?
Monotony, a mean boss, unfriendly coworkers.
Just for a moment, ask yourself if any of those things are really beyond you, beyond your control, beyond your ability to change.
No.
Okay, stay with that thought. Here's what we're coming to, hopefully.
Yeah.
We say nothing is outside of us. Everything comes to us that we have asked for. So if I am everything now that I really want, then what are the blocks that keeps me from that awareness?
It's our thoughts about it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But what are those thoughts?
Conditioning.
What are the thoughts that would keep you from saying, right now, I am the presence of peace. I am the presence of love. I am the presence of being satisfied with people around me. I am whatever. What stops you from going to that place and removing the blocks to your awareness of love's presence? It's a suggestion. Let's try to do it together. See what we come up with.
Yeah.
Let's let our mind know when we really have the space. Let's just ask the God self. If there's nothing here but illusion in this world, and I am told, that the real search and seeking is already over. That it was over a millisecond after I thought it was possible to separate. It was done. If all that is true, then what's wrong with me accepting everything? What's wrong with my belief that I can't get outside of God? No matter how I try, I can't get outside of God.
Why would you want to?
In other words,
See,
what
that's
is
what
wrong?
I'm saying, Jim. It's okay.
What's wrong with
It's okay.
what's not real?
Why I would want to or not want to can occupy lifetimes. But what if it's all okay? I can't go anywhere with it. I can't change it. All I can do is surrender it.
Is what?
Surrender it.
Surrender to it.
And I surrender it by allowing it to be okay.
Would be the realization of what is.
But when you
The
let go of
acceptance.
what isn't,
You
what
let
is
go of what isn't, what's there. It would be reality.
the truth of the way the Course describes forgiveness says the only thing that can be changed is your perception. Everything else is created by God and is changeless. And forgiving it simply means to let it go. Because when you let it go, what remains is what is. No, it's not. So if you were not intended to be the source of happiness, how will you ever be happy? So when you read the Course in Miracles and you read one of the million places, it must be at least a million places where Brother says, consider your holy self. You are the holy child of God. What does that mean? Can you sit back and say, yes, I am the holy child of God? Or wouldn't that be nice?
Well, what you first have to do, I think, is be willing to give that to everyone. In other words,
I don't think you'd have any trouble doing that if you were it.
yeah, I mean, if you were the happiness or the child of God, love incarnate, or whatever, any way you want to approach it, you would have to be willing to give up your judgments, and that's not the easiest thing in the world.
That could very well be a clue as to why many of us back away from the prospect of being the source of love, the source of happiness.
Yeah, self-righteousness is a real...
Yes. That's why I'm asking the question. What is your goal in studying the Course? Because if it's not to be able to accept that you're what you were created to be, then what's the point of it? If we're just here reading about a bunch of stuff because it makes us feel good, come on. How long can that last? So to kind of wind us back to where we began, the next time, and if you can, make it a habit, when you study the Course, pay attention to what he asks you to do. And pay attention to why he's asking you to do it. When he says, you are the holy child of God, understand that he's trying to tell you, this book is here to show you who you are. That is its sole purpose, to show you the truth of who you are. So accept it. Or if you can't accept it, then ask why. You are the holy child of God. That's all I have for today. It's a little thing called belief.
Belief.
And belief seems to control our reality. but in truth it doesn't. It has nothing to do with it. Our belief has nothing to do with our reality. In fact, it has nothing to do with the world's reality. Everything has to be changed to fit. That's what perception does. It alters everything, all of our intake, to fit our belief and make the world then seem real, and we seem a part of all of that.
Why would I want to create this?
He tells us that when we find the reason, it'll immediately be gone.
How do we find the reason?
That's what I'd like to have us talk about today. What is the general theme that we have found throughout the course and the workbook and every other book in the Course in Miracles? What's the general theme? What is it based around? Forgiveness.
Love and forgiveness.
Yeah.
Forgiveness.
Two things to me.
Everything is based on forgiveness. So,
Right.
if I want to put myself in your position, in other words, the position of the real you, in the position of you and the real you, the first thing I have to do is think of myself in an entirely different way. The self I now see, the body self that I now see, is a self that we call ego, that is based upon everything that I believe. However, everything that I believe happens to be false. So I asked Brother then, what is the self I should see? And he said, your God self. I'm always sitting here thinking, too frequently, thinking God self is, Holy Spirit is, God is something else, is not me. Not me, God self. But why? And then he asked me, why? That's a term that I think I coined, incidentally, God self. And I coined it because saying Holy Spirit made it seem too distant from me, and I wanted to feel more a part of it. So I called it God, the reality of self, which is me, God self, that's me. So he keeps reminding me. Why I coined this phrase, God self, is because that's who I really am. That's who we all really are. How? Or can you? Can you put yourself or think of yourself in a place of absolute oneness?
Of absolute what?
Oneness.
Oneness.
Well, the answer obviously is no. If we could, we would, and it'd all be done. Brother tells us, however, that we are not required to figure out the way to find God. He said what you are required to do is be willing to find Him. And when you are willing to find Him, the means of finding Him, of fulfilling your will come. The very first time that I was contemplating, I had been invited to do a sharing with him, and I was petrified. I felt perfectly comfortable in going inside and envisioning brothers sitting in the garden on a bench and looking into his eyes and saying whatever came. But I was absolutely petrified to attend this gathering and just share from my own awareness. So I kept asking Brother, what should I do? What should I do? Finally one day he said, do you trust me? And I said, implicitly. And he said, then be with me and together we'll just show up. Linda can probably tell you he's better than I. First I did the channeling business. This fellow that had invited me to come also channeled. So he did his channeling thing. So I sat there and he was finished and he said, okay, go ahead, do your thing. And I went through my little dance of seeing him on the bench in our garden, me on the grass looking into his eyes, waiting for him to speak, and he said nothing. There was nothing coming. I thought, oh God, this is such an embarrassing time. And I said, please say something in my mind. Please say something. And he said, "Come sit beside me." From that point on, everything that came not with my thinking that I was channeling him, but that it was coming from, through, and part of my God self. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. We all do that, but rarely do we allow ourselves to acknowledge that's what we do. And that's the highlight of my whole experience with him. Everything, because of the experience from that day on changed. There was never a sense of him and me. For a long time, there was a sense of us in a way that allowed me to associate with the God self. Now, let me point out something. The reason this is so important is because if we are to move into this so-called awakened state, and if we are able to put ourselves in the position of our real self, that we become the self that is not looking to awaken, but the self that acknowledges its being awake. If we're to do all of that, none of it is going to happen until we answer that key, most crucial of all questions. Do I want it? Nothing is going to come to us that we don't want. Nothing is going to come to us that we are ambivalent about. So it's going to take a conscious commitment to acknowledging that is what I want. To the exclusion of all else, that's what I want. What he says is, you will see the flesh, or you will see the spirit. And which you choose to see will determine who you think you are. And so when I choose to see my body, I'm going to choose to see something that in my ego's perception needs to be healed. Because the body will always be imperfect. It is the means for our imperfection, which is the opposite of what's true. So I always have to bring myself back to the awareness. When I ask for a physical healing, when I ask that I not have another stroke, all I am saying is I hope, I wish, I pray, I value this form more than the truth about me. I am seeing the flesh and not the spirit. And taking that back to where we began this discussion, seeing that, being in that place, I will never be able to find the truth of myself. Because I'm coming from a point of view where there is no truth. There is no truth in the reality of the form. Our consciousness now, as I've said this before, our consciousness really is in the process of trying to decide whether or not to maintain death as an idea of our story. That's exciting. That's exciting because suddenly we're bearing ourselves into what really causes the separation. It's not the body. That's a symbol. But what really causes the separation? When we acknowledge, do this for yourself, because if you have anything akin to experiences I've had, believe me, it's an adventure. Take yourself to a very nice meditative state and ask yourself if you are willing not to die. That seems like such a stupid question, but do that. Am I willing not to die? You see, it's going to be entirely different, though, Dan. By deciding that I am willing not to die, I'm not protecting the body, but I'm also not valuing it. So I can come and go. I can be in the body or I can not be in the body. It's irrelevant. One of the things that Brother has been trying to impart to us in this group of lessons, this whole group of maybe 20 lessons, is that, well, first of all, fundamentally, there will be one awakening. There's not going to be a time when we get it and somebody else doesn't, and so therefore we will awaken and they won't. There is one awakening because the one consciousness is a fact. We are all part of a single consciousness. Every time I try to trap Brother and ask him, how does that really work? He keeps saying to me, when you approach this from the standpoint of the world you now see, based on differences and separateness, you'll never understand this. But once you accept the principle, the truth of the principle, that we are all connected, then you will see it could be no other way. He says when you think about it from the perspective of oneness, then everything shifts.
Yeah.
So to me, the key is how do I put myself in that position of thinking about it from the standpoint of our union, our oneness.
Yes.
What might you guess? What is the general theme that we have found throughout the course and the workbook and every other book in the Course in Miracles? What's the general theme? What is it based around? Forgiveness. Everything is based on forgiveness. So,
Right.
if I want to put myself in your position, in other words, the position of the real you, in the position of you and the real you, the first thing I have to do is think of myself in an entirely different way. The self I now see, the body self that I now see, is a self that we call ego, that is based upon everything that I believe. However, everything that I believe happens to be false. So I asked Brother then, what is the self I should see? And he said, your God self. Your God's. I'm always sitting here thinking, too frequently, thinking God self is, Holy Spirit is, God is something else, is not me. Not me, God self. But why? And then he asked me, why? That's a term that I think I coined, incidentally, God self. And I coined it because saying Holy Spirit made it seem too distant from me, and I wanted to feel more a part of it. So I called it God, the reality of self, which is me, God self, that's me. So he keeps reminding me. Why I coined this phrase, God self, is because that's who I really am. That's who we all really are. How? Or can you? Can you put yourself or think of yourself in a place of absolute oneness? Well, the answer obviously is no. If we could, we would, and it'd all be done. What he says is you will see the flesh or you will see the spirit. And which you choose to see will determine who you think you are. And so when I choose to see my body, I'm going to choose to see something that in my ego's perception needs to be healed. Because the body will always be imperfect. It is the means for our imperfection, which is the opposite of what's true. So I always have to bring myself back to the awareness. When I ask for a physical healing, when I ask that I not have another stroke, all I am saying is I hope, I wish, I pray, I value this form more than the truth about me. I am believing it, I am seeing the flesh and not the spirit. And taking that back to where we began this discussion, seeing that, being in that place, I will never be able to find the truth of myself. Because I'm coming from a point of view where there is no truth. There is no truth in the reality of the form. Did God create death? Yeah. So it's kind of hard for me to look forward to it.
Yeah.
There's something I'm missing. And that's what I'm suggesting. If you all do this meditation process, we'll help one another find out what it is that we're really after and what it is that we're really avoiding. But we don't know that. Not here, not now. Brother said that one of the very first things I can recall him saying to me was, one thing you can always be sure of, everything, everyone, always wants to know that they are loved. That's the one constant we can depend on. There's two reasons that we use things that we use death for. For separation, to prove to ourselves that we can, in fact, be separate. It's not about the body. It's way deeper than it being about the body. It's all about revenge and escape. Revenge, we use it to project our guilt onto somebody else. And escape, we use it primarily from sickness. That we allow ourselves, or we feel as though we can allow ourselves to be sick because we can always die and escape the pain. So you see, we're avoiding our most serious reasons for remaining separate. If you were not willing to die, for instance, it would mean that you could be trapped in sickness for eternity, according to the ego's perception. So dying is a way of escape. One of the most powerful lessons that the Course teaches us always to ask to see something differently. And that's the thrust of this paragraph. Give it a different purpose. Change your mind about it. Ultimately, that's where you have to go. Who's asking? You're going to come to the place of recognizing who can ask that question. And that, when you, again, just as you were saying about the other proposition, as soon as you move into it, it changes its purpose automatically because you're moving toward where your real objections are. And the ego is kind of left hanging. When I've said to you before about recognizing that the purpose of consciousness today is to decide whether or not to keep the idea of dying. And it's so illuminating to me because it's not about anything I'd ever imagined dying to be about. It has very little to do with the body, very little at all to do with the body, but it has almost everything to do, Scott, with my being willing to love myself. That's the escape clause that the ego gives the idea. How do you change your mind about who you are? Ask, ask, ask. You could ask, and Teddy could ask, and Jim could ask. There would be 3 different answers that would take you all 3 to the same place. The Course says something that has always kind of befuddled me. it's in one of our recent readings where it says that the time for our awakening has been set. We have established, we, not God, but we, have established the time. And as soon as we will allow it to come into full awareness, then we see it. To come into full awareness, we see it. And when we see it, we recognize that that's the way it's always been. Now it's, I don't know, it's strange, but I've always had the feeling that I've been marking time until my time shows up. We're trying to stay present, trying to stay open to the awareness coming, receiving it when it is there, and yet not really feeling as though I needed to do something now to advance it. If that makes any sense. The Holy Spirit is our real mind. Ask yourself this question, even from the most mundane reasoning perspective. If what is created, if something is created by a thought that we put forth, then we are the creation of God. We are the thought of God, extended. How do you take that thought of God, which is who you are? How do you take that thought and separate it from its source? You really can't you? No. So any experience of that thought must be an experience held in conjunction with its source. That's finding the person who is asking the question. Now I am stripping away the ego person who can only question the story and finding the person who is literally asleep but telling the story. The real storyteller. Okay? So, when you ask the question about oblivion, and that being obviously a fear that you have, how could it be possible that something called oblivion could exist in the mind of someone who is an extension of the mind that made him? What I'm suggesting, we go through how many lifetimes, Lord only knows how many, looking for something, seeking but not finding, when all of the time it's simply our motivation for the seeking that we're trying to find, we're trying to change. Everything is in place. Everything is all around us. All I have to do is say, yes, that's what I want. Not, no, that's what I don't want. Just that. And everything changes. Period. That's what I want. This is what I'm looking for. I just found it. The split mind can't see that which is what the Course calls whole. Because the split mind, that is the definition of a mind being split when it sees everything in contradiction. Forgiveness in its most simplistic form simply says, I can change the meaning and everything else will change to confirm that meaning. I've changed nothing and I've changed everything. So, what is it that you would like to see?
Christ figured.
So be it. What will make you see that?
Well, I haven't quite figured that out yet.
We've been reading here, Raj, everything. Nothing is required except the choice to have that and nothing else. Just that. Love always finds what it looks for. See, that's the great dichotomy in our learning process. We keep thinking there's a difference between the one who is asking and the one who is answering. We are both the thought of asking and we're the thought of answering. You see, if you remove the restrictions, that must happen. There must be an answer to every question. Absolutely. You can forgive yourself for it simply because it doesn't matter. Whether you get the answer or not, nothing has changed. That one statement, God is inevitable, is all you need.